Hi, welcome back to the Keys History and Discovery Center on this sunny Thursday. I'm Brad Bertelli, the curator at the facility, and we are going to take some more time to talk about another one of our exhibits here at the Keys History and Discovery Center. We are looking forward to opening up next week a little bit, and then getting back to a more normal schedule, so we are able to welcome our visitors and our locals to come see what great progress we've made over the last 6 years here at the museum. And today we're going to talk about a very popular subject in the Florida Keys. We're going to talk a little bit about pirates. The exhibit behind me kind of covers 3 different topics in general. The wrecking industry, it talks about pirates, and it talks about Alligator Lighthouse and just kind of the whole wrecking, salvage, and pirates. Now, the pirates and the Florida Keys, everyone really seems to put those two together. It's kind of like adding lime to your rum. It's a very popular combination. You would think that the island chain would go hand in hand with pirate stories, but it's a great story, it's great lore, but there are not a lot of examples of actual acts of piracy happening in the Florida Keys. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of them that actually did happen. If you have questions, please type them in, and Erin will raise her hand and let me know, and we'll answer those on live here. If not, I will get back to you later this afternoon if you type them in later, and I will answer questions to the best of my ability at that point. Now, during the Adams-Onis Treaty, when the U.S. purchased the Florida territory from Spain, what was included was, the mainland, a larger expanse of the mainland than is today. Also, the Florida Keys. But the third element that was involved with the transaction was the Florida Reef. And what the government recognized early on was that it was the only route between New Orleans and the Mississippi River, all the goods coming up and transferring to the East Coast, also all the goods coming from South America and Mexico, and they needed to protect the reef line because it was a dangerous place, not just as a mariner sailing up with the coral reefs and with the weather, but also with pirates who would patrol the reef line. Pirates were, they were a lot like a shark. They were opportunistic feeders. If they saw a ship wrecked on the reef, they would absolutely stop and plunder to their heart's delight. So there was a study done by the military in 1819, and among the accounts of piracy that would affect American trade was the account of the Emma Sophia, which was boarded and attacked on December 19th in 1818. And the Emma Sophia was traveling from Hamburg down to Havana when it was cruising along the Florida Reef, when it encountered a pirate schooner that had 30 pirates on board and had 1 gun. And the case of the Emma Sophia is really more indicative of the kind of piracy that was happening along the Florida Straits in this area. What the pirates did was they escorted the Emma Sophia to a creek or a bay that was formed by the Florida Keys, between the Florida Keys and the reef line. And as they were kind of here in this secure area, the pirates boarded the ship and they demanded, diamonds and money and held people at knife point. And at one point, the supercargo, who was the man in charge of all the cargo on board, he was held at knife point. And then Davis, who was the pirate in charge, ordered his henchmen to go get a noose, and they threw a noose over the mizzenmast and dropped the noose down, and they were threatening to hang the supercargo unless he spilled the beans on where the treasure was, where are the diamonds, where's your money. And the cargo gentleman, he had a watch, or had a watch, not a wristwatch, but a pocket watch, and said, "This is all I have of value," and they were going to put the noose on him, and he jumps overboard into the water, and after some point, the pirates bring him back on deck, and he's stripped of all his clothes and laid on the deck naked and covered with a blanket, where he said that he laid without moving a hand or foot for 5 hours. The ship was plundered to a tune of about $5,000, which in 1818 was a substantial amount of money. But no one was killed. Now that was not always the case in piracy. I know you watch Pirates of the Caribbean and the Disney versions of piracy, and it's all kind of romanticized. But piracy was a brutal endeavor. And with pirates, lopping off arms, lopping off legs, trying to get to the truth of where the treasure, the diamonds, the money, the gold was being held. Now, after this report came out from the Navy about these acts of piracy, it was only a couple months later, in March of 1819, that President James Monroe created an act to protect the commerce of the United States against crime and crimes of piracy. And it was this act that established the West Indies Squadron. And the West Indies Squadron was most famously run by Commodore David Porter, but his predecessor was Commodore James Biddle, who was not super effective. Biddle was more interested, or kind of old school guy, and relied on big, heavy drafted ships that might be great for warfare out at sea. But the pirates that were operating in this area, and they were largely from Puerto Rico and Mexico and Cuba. And the Bahamas, they were not really in the Keys, but kind of in the surrounding areas, and they were traveling up and down the Florida Reef line, so they were in the area, but not kind of in the Keys. But Biddle was not very effective, so he was relieved of duty, and Commodore James Porter was brought on board in 1822, and he ended up going down to Key West and establishing the naval depot down in Key West, named Allenton, and at that point Key West was, oh my Lord, I've forgotten the name, not called Key West, and it's escaped my brain for right now, so I'm going to just jump ahead. But there is a lot of misconceptions about what Commodore Porter was doing. He was sent here to clear the waters of piracy and make it safe for American seamen and merchants in the area. But most of his activity was in Cuba, was in Puerto Rico, was in Central America and Mexico, and there were very few accounts of piracy happening here in the Florida Keys. By example, there was a chart that was created in 1825 and kind of done in a tribute to the naval seamen who had been protecting this area and protecting the West Indies. And this map was of the West Indies, and it also had a history of all the acts of piracy against American merchants and American seamen from 1818 to 1825. And this is where kind of the mythology of pirates in the Florida Keys really kind of bumps heads with reality. There are over 90 acts of piracy listed on this map, and I've read through all of them. Some of them are quite disturbing, quite violent, and of all the 90 acts of piracy that have been documented, that were recorded, only one is associated with the Florida Keys. And it wasn't even on the Florida Keys, it was associated near the Florida Keys. So Porter and his group were not, they took care of piracy in the West Indies pretty rapidly, and it only took a handful of years to really make the waters much safer. Pirates were never, totally eradicated. They're like cockroaches. They're always going to be someone lurking around, and again, they're opportunistic. So, there's a ship that's stuck on the reef line, and and piracy is defined as any act of, any act of aggression or act of unlawfulness at sea is determined to be piracy. So, there was always some act of piracy here and there going on, and still today, there are acts of piracy on the high seas. But this was really kind of shows what the Pirates in the Florida Keys is a great story, but not a lot of actual pirate content associated with the island chain. Now, kind of a cool subset of this story, you can see the picture behind me of that Jolly Roger. And that is an actual bona fide pirate flag. And it was discovered in Central America on a shipwreck by the Upper Keys' own Art Silverbar McKee, who is considered the father of modern day treasure hunting. He was the one who really brought the salvage of the 1733 treasure fleet to light, back to in modern times. He created a museum of sunken treasure that kind of housed all the artifacts that he would take from the 1733 treasure fleet. But during one of his dives down in somewhere in the West Indies, I can't think off the top of my head what it is, he discovered an actual bona fide pirate flag. And that is about as real as this is actually a blown up picture. What you can't see down here is this flag flew over Plantation Key, over his Museum of Sunken Treasure. And for years, that flag flew next to the American flag and other flags. You can see pictures of an actual, 18th century pirate flag actually flying in the wind. And there are only a handful of these bona fide pirate flags known to be in existence. Now, Pat Croce, who used to own the Philadelphia 76ers, owned lots of restaurants, and he loves pirates and loves all things piratical, and has one of the largest personal collections of pirate memorabilia and artifacts, and had several years ago Pirate Soul Museum down in Key West. That museum has since moved to St. Augustine, and one of the artifacts that Croce acquired was this flag that had been discovered by Art McKee. And that flag you can see on display in St. Augustine. The next time you travel up to St. Augustine and visit the Pirate Museum, you can see this bona fide pirate flag that used to fly over Plantation Key for several years. Now, this is going to be a two-parter because there are a lot of stories to tell. Not a lot of stories to tell, but there's the longer Black Caesar story that I don't want to jump into right now because we are going to jump into that another time. Yes, Aaron, I see there's a question.
Well, I have a question. No one typed a question, but I have a question. You were talking about the map that detailed a certain time period of pirate interactions. How did this correspond to the creation of a regulated salvage industry? Do you think that a legal salvage process in any way impacted any of the pirates become legitimate salvagers?
Now, they can hear you, or should I repeat that?
I think they can hear you.
Okay. Now, wreckers and salvage, they really get the knock on being, a little better than pirates. And before, when wrecking before this became an American territory, there was a lot of competing wreckers. There were the English wreckers who were operating out of Provence and Nassau in the Bahamas, and then the Spanish wreckers who were operating out of Havana and Cuba, and they would often compete for wrecks. And before it was regulated, there are a lot of stories about, bad wreckers, burning wrecks and burning lights. And a lot of that activity, you really don't find evidence of it in the post-American occupation of the Florida Reef. But there's lots of stories. And wrecking became the first wrecking. One of the things that Porter did when he was down here, he saw how loosey-goosey the wrecking operations were, and how exorbitant some of these salvage claims that were being paid out. Sometimes as much as 95% of the value of the cargo and of the ship were being awarded to these salvagers. And one of the things that Porter did was wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Navy that said, there needs to be some rules installed here because it's a free-for-all out on the reef, and there needs to be something done. So in 1823, the first wrecking laws went on the books. And among these laws was one that made it illegal for people to burn false lights or to move lights. And that is, so at some point that had to have been happening, otherwise it never would have gone into print as a law. But when you look at the record books, there are never, those instances of that happening are really rare, and you really don't find them. It's more of a myth, and probably a holdover from the days when the Bahamians, the English, and the Spanish were really salvaging working on the reef. And now one of the things that the Americans did after, this came up in the 1823 laws, was they made it that because of the Florida Reef was an American territory, that anything salvaged off of the Florida Reef had to be brought to an American port of entry. And at that point, that was either Key West or up in St. Augustine. So at that point, a lot of the Bahamians moved from the Bahamas to Key West. Because that's where the money was, and wrecking was a very profitable business. That's what made Key West the richest city per capita in the country at one point, and so that kind of brought the first wave of Bahamians over from, and also and New Englanders as well. Jakub Hausman is a great example of this. He is the Indian or the record king of Indian Key. He came down from New York in 1822, and this is kind of right in the Wild West days of wrecking out on the reef. And he would end up being stuck in Key West for several years, and kind of got a lay of the land and figured out what was going on and how lucrative wrecking was. Yes.
Ryan would like to know, were salvaged goods taxed by America?
That's a good question, Ryan. I don't know if they were taxed. I imagine that once they were sold, they would have been taxed. I'm not sure if, the salvagers would come, they would salvage the goods, and before there was a court system down in Key West, about 1828, there was kind of the claims were, done several different ways. One of the ways you could do it was have a quarry of five jurors, so to speak. Two would represent the salvagers. Two would represent the rights and the interests of the boat captain, and one would be an impartial observer. And they would kind of negotiate back and forth and figure out a salvage claim. And then that was award. And the award was paid not by the captain, but by the insurance company. This is another, lots of cases of insurance fraud would come in at this point. Because because all these ships were insured because it was risky to sail from the Mississippi or from New Orleans to New York and the East Coast. Not to mention, pirates are one thing, but it's also hurricanes and storms and just bad weather, and the Florida Reef, very dangerous. So all these ships would be insured, and so the insurance companies would end up paying the price. But I don't think that they were. And I could be wrong. I don't ever see any, here's your salvage claim. Now we're going to take, 12% back of that for taxes. I know once the goods were resold out in Key West, because they would go, the goods would be, the salvage company or the wreckers would be paid their share, and then there would be an auction of the goods, and the merchants in Key West and other areas would come and they would bid on the goods, and then those goods would be brought to merchant stores and sold in Key West. As a point of example, there was one wreck where there was lots and lots of shoes on the wreck, and I want to say Italian shoes. I'm not positive that's true, but from that point forward, everyone in Key West was wearing this one kind of shoe because that's what was kind of there, because the stores would be stocked with what was available and what kind of came in, and I'm sure that there were taxes paid by the merchants, taxes paid by at that level, but I don't think the salvagers themselves were paid. And that was a long, complicated answer. And Ryan, thanks for tuning in again. Does anybody else Okay, so we're gonna, I'm gonna save the story of Black Caesar, which is kind of the most famous, infamous pirate tale of in the Florida Keys, and that's going to take me 15 minutes to get through, so I'm going to save that for another day. We'll be doing this for a long time as we continue to explore the Keys History and Discovery Center. So in the meantime, tomorrow we're going to be Field Trip Fridays, and we're going to be in downtown Tavernier talking about some of the historic structures that are there today. Today I think Cafe Mocha is and the Tavernier Hotel and a little turquoise building next to it, which has a really great history. So we'll be there tomorrow talking about some of the buildings in Tavernier. We recorded a really cool community view webinar last night, which should probably be going to our YouTube page the next day or two, and that'll be available to watch, and that gives a much more detailed account of kind of the early history of Tavernier. In the meantime, we will see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock in historic downtown Tavernier, where we're going to explore firsthand some of the buildings, the historic buildings that are still standing. So you guys have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow morning.